I'm happy to present at this conference, although it looks like I'll be the only English-speaking presenter. So thanks for coming and listening to me anyways, and so early in the morning. I'd like to maintain the broadness and openness of this brave topic of love, as I talk with you about love in the poetry of one of America's most experimental modernist poets, E.E. Cummings. He's known for his erotic poetry, but in my short talk with you, I wish to explore the pataphysical and philosophical implications of his poems about love itself. Cummings views love as a proposition, as if, that must be cultivated and treated as real, not simply regarded as ideal or abstract. For Cummings, love is an idiosyncratic creation, a laughing exception to the norm, which reveals that the norm is but a chance collection of convenient exceptions. This is pataphysical, and this keeps the topic of love entirely open. To begin our talk, I would like to read a simple 10-line poem written by Cummings in 1935, which I've passed around. And second, I will trace Cummings' poetic heritage. Third, his pataphysical influences and effluences. And fourth, his philosophical lineage. And then lastly, I will return to this little poem and analyze it and to summarize Cummings' conception of love. So first, the poem. It's very simple. Love is a place, and through this place of love move, with brightness of peace, all places. Yes is a world, and in this world of yes live, skillfully curled, all worlds. So most of you probably have a passing familiarity with Cummings. He wrote between 1904 and 1962, and is therefore considered a modernist. But his modernism is more due to his being peers with the likes of Eliot, Pound, and Moore, because he doesn't share their characteristic tension, ambivalence, reflexivity, and detachment. Instead, his work is rife with livelier forms of parody, irony, and language-bending plays. He took seriously Pound's joke to make it new, and created his own spontaneous and anti-intellectual poetic language by repeating choice words, by creating portmanteaus and reverse portmanteaus, and by manipulating grammar, syntax, and parts of speech. According to his critics, in a world baked and puckered by fear, he proposes gaiety and laughter, openness and delight. He has ostensibly simplistic answers to the times. In his simple striving to go beyond the conflicts of modernism, Cummings has more in common with the Romantics, from whom he descends through Emerson and Whitman. Pound refers to Cummings as Whitman's one living descendant, and addresses him as "my dear Walt Whitman" in their personal letters. Cummings, like Whitman, created an artistic persona and then transformed the man into the persona so that they became one. This creation and subsequent treating as real is pataphysical, and it's key to Cummings' figuration of love, albeit in another sense. Lovers create a plural self and then form into it. With the Romantics, Cummings also shares a penchant for atheistic theologizing, for wonder and nature, for the individual, for preserving mystery, and for privileging feeling. The best gesture of my brain is less than your eyelids flutter, he writes. Like Coleridge, he views nature as process rather than product, as dynamic rather than static, as organic rather than artificial. Cummings' lyric inventiveness and his catachrestic metaphors make him an anachronistic member of the group of lyric poets that Samuel Johnson grumpily called the Metaphysicals, a group of whom Cummings was well aware thanks to his education and to T.S. Eliot's 1921 essay. Gary Lane notes that Cummings' vocabulary bounds romantic vagueness with hard edges. And like Donne's persona, Cummings' lover solipsistically acknowledges real existence only in the love of his lady and himself. The Metaphysicals were most famous for their metaphysical conceits, which, according to Christina Hall, are absurd gestures that render startlingly appropriate. A metaphysical conceit, or a metaphor, draws its power from referencing a plane of reference, or an abstraction. Cummings, on the other hand, writes pataphysical conceits, or pataphors. These do not reference an imaginary world outside our own, but create this imagined, therefore limitless world as our own. A startling pataphysical conceit may seem absurd, because it actually startles the ego out of egocentricity by being eccentric, outside the center. Helen Gardner says that a metaphysical conceit is a comparison whose ingenuity is more striking than its justness, which implies that it still has justness. But a pataphysical conceit is a comparison whose ingenuity is not only more striking than its justness, but a comparison whose ingenuity has no regard for justness. Justness is canceling exceptions, making idiosyncrasies fit the norm, and it will come later when the metaphysicians bring their skulls full of sharp little tools for measuring angels and their scalpels for dissecting kisses, writes Cummings. To summarize, pataphysical conceits create, whereas metaphysical conceits relate. Cummings is a pataphysical chimera, both a hybrid and an illusion, of modernism, the period in which he writes, of the romantics, and of the metaphysicals. I would call him a paramodernist or a post-romantic. These are tired prefixes. He's a pataphysicist. Pataphysics is the imaginary science of exceptions. As I have been hinting, pataphysics studies exceptions, mistakes, and jokes. It treats the imaginary as most real and the humorous as most serious. It creates worlds through pataphors rather than referring to worlds like metaphors. It was invented at the turn of the century in France by a man named Alfred Jarry in his book The Adventures of Dr. Faustroll and in his play Ubu Roy. In Cummings' 1931 book Viva, he alludes to Jarry's Faustroll, who sails in a sieve thanks to Kelvin's law of surface tension. Launch we a hyper-luxurious super-sieve, he writes, with the philophilic name SS Van Merwe, a name that mimes Jarry's Ubu Roy, whose first word in his play is merwe, a clinomen of the French for shit. Cummings knew of pataphysics, and I haven't found significant research on this topic, but I think that he seeks to explore it in his poetry, and especially through love. To study idiosyncrasies and exceptions, these things that metaphysics implicitly ignores, pataphysics deploys a fairly complicated vocabulary, but I'm only going to look at one concept, the clinomen, or the swerve. A clinomen is the smallest possible aberration that can make the greatest possible difference. Pataphysics is the best physics for Cummings' idiosyncratic love, because, as Cummings writes, love's function is to fabricate unknownness, to create what is not yet real, what is as if. Pataphysics studies each little clinomen that, as Christian Book says, posits the possible consequences of an impossible inconsequence. Physics does not concern itself with the as-if, and metaphysics changes as-if to if-then. It is the suspension of disbelief in the as-if. It changes the operative to the imperative. But pataphysics operates through the as-if. Life, Cummings notes in his play Hymn, is a verb of two voices, active, to do, and passive, to dream. Pataphysical love is to do a dream. Cummings pataphysically perceives all things, especially all living things and all people, as loving laughs. He uses the word love 344 times in his poetry, and the word laugh 66 times. He writes in his jottings that only so long as we can laugh at ourselves are we nobody else. Laughter is most serious. It is the tiniest smile that may be bigger than all hearts never which have loved, writes Cummings. It is what Emerson calls immortal hilarity, the ha of disorder within order, as in the Joycean portmanteau chaosmos. To Cummings, every human being is in and of himself or herself illimitable, but the essence of his or her illimitability is precisely its uniqueness. There is a paradox here. The plural is in the singular. Laughter is the uniqueness that creates the individual, ha-hexeity, the idiosyncrasy that defies, and may even be one of the seeds for creating, language. I coined this neologism, ha-hexeity, after Duns Scotus's word hexeity, or thisness, those individual and specific differences that make a thing a certain thing. Ha-hexeity amplifies the laugh inherent in hexeity. Bastinage, Faustroll's subhuman companion in Alfred Jarry's novella, can only say ha-ha. Ha-ha is multiplicity and singularity. Pronounced slowly, ha-ha is duality, but pronounced quickly, ha-ha is unity. Hexeity is merely a mode of individuation, says Deleuze. Ha-hexeity is the amusing uniqueness of each thing, the constellation of idiosyncrasies that make a person, exemplified by laughter, what Alfonso Lingus calls the current of intense communication between strangers, what Emmanuel Levinas recognizes as refusing language, and what Mladen Dolar identifies as the inarticulate quasi-animality that is quintessential humanity. Laughter is fundamental to being with others, and it calls, exe, behold, for itself, its sound, and those who hear it to be humble, to be affirmatively abnegating, to be love, and to love. Laughter is how we charge into the strenuous briefness of life, writes Cummings. And the laughter of afterwards teases our mortality and promises joy in the midst of the greatest trauma, where, Cummings writes, new fragrantly young earth space opening was. Laughter is both an example of love and a metaphor that introduces and creates love. I am, therefore I laugh and love. I love and laugh, therefore I am. A little laugh, a ha-hexaity, refuses language and unites strangers in what Deleuze calls a perfect individuality lacking nothing. As laughter, most serious, creates the individual, the idiosyncrasies and foibles of the flesh, so love creates worlds. Cummings's pataphysical love anticipates the work of several philosophers. Unsurprisingly, poetry reaches and surpasses the following conclusions on love, who wields a poem huger than the grave, before philosophy has rubbed the sleep from its eyes. Kierkegaard wrestles with it in Works on Love, and arrives at several unexceptional though thorough conclusions. Kierkegaard is most compelling in his word choice. He calls love eccentric. He writes that love is not the proud flight that soars above the world, it is self-denial's humble and difficult flight along the ground. That love is present in the least things, that to love the neighbor is to find him lovable despite and with his weaknesses and defects and imperfections. He writes that love is infinitely fragile, that love believes all things without being deceived, and hopes all things without being shamed. And he speaks of a divine kind of madness in love. Reading Kierkegaard against himself, we see that he points to a pataphysical love of little Klinemans and ha-hexaeties. But Kierkegaard does not venture through what he calls these inconstant, futile, weird, phantasmal flashes of possibility, through these seams into the seamy side of existence, into pataphysics, and instead remains within the riskless realm of metaphysics, where propositions go untested and unactualized. While Cummings beckons us to open and grow in love, asking that all the weird worlds be opened, Kierkegaard frowns and barks that to shut your door and pray to God is the shortest way to find love. As if in response, Cummings writes that love is something illimitable, and a lot of people spend their limited lives trying to prevent anything illimitable from happening to them, anything unique. The Great Dane tills the fields of love philosophy, where Nancy and Badiou will later sow Cummings-like seeds. Unwittingly watering the plants of Cummings's love, place, and yes world, Jean-Luc Nancy announces in his essay Shattered Love that love is perhaps nothing but the indefinite abundance of all possible loves. To Nancy, love is an infinite migration through the other, that arrives only at the limit while crossing it, and an imminent immanence that is the impossible, and in which there are no parts, moments, types, or stages. There is only an infinity of shatters. Love is wholly complete in one soul embrace or in the history of a life. In his short book, In Praise of Love, Alain Badiou argues for a constant reinvention of love as a two-scene, or identical difference, as a locus of two rather than one from which the world is felt, like Donne's and Cummings's Lover. Pataphysically, Badiou says that love invents a different way of lasting in life. We does not exist without love. We sans love equals mob, Cummings writes. We is the pronoun of love, a two-scene, ha-ha, a little singular plural place from where the world is felt. One's not half two, it's two are halves of one, writes Cummings. To tie up all these loose ends, I'll return to Cummings' little poem about love that I've handed out. The first thing I notice is that the poem is symmetrical, almost. Every symmetry is really an asymmetry, for if each verse was identical, they would merely be copies. Since they are different, we notice that they are the same, or symmetrical. This is a Klineman. Symmetry is always asymmetry. It always swerves from asymmetry. This symmetrical asymmetry is what Badiou calls the two-scene, or identical difference. It is like ha-ha, or ha-ha, two ha-hexaeties uniting to form a perspective from which the world can be viewed. This symmetrical asymmetry is love, and it is through pataphor. Love is a place, and yes is a world. Through symmetry, Cummings shows us that love is yes, that place is world, that through is in, that live is move, and that brightness of peace is skillfully curled. Love is a place, that is, a meaningful space. Love is a place that does not yet exist, but insists, and that can exist when it is lived, when it is laughed and loved, as the general in the individual, the only way that the general can be. Cummings shows us the curling together of two perspectives in the twining and the conjunction of the ampersand in the second lines. And he shows us the pataphysical action that love must be in the third line, love move. This is a clinomen from an L to an M that makes the greatest difference. Love is movement and also place. It coalesces and transcends space and time by creating new space-time. In the fourth and fifth lines, Cummings shows us that all places move with brightness of peace through love. Love, as Badiou says, is constant reinvention, or, as Nancy says, is an infinite migration through the other. Love's movement placement, symmetrical asymmetry, is bright and peaceful. Love is both that which acts love, what Nancy calls the embrace, and that in which love is acted, what Nancy calls the whole history of a life, and it's complete in both. Because all places move through love, and love itself is a place, love moves through itself. Love, Cummings writes, is the whole and more than all. As Nancy says, love is the abundance of all possible loves. With brightness and peace, all events and moments are actualized in love, in the place created by treating the as-if as real. In this way, yes represents the sum of all the situations in which it might be used, and love is eternally momentary actualization of these possibilities. Yes is a world. Yes is love. To say yes to the idiosyncrasies of another person, another hahaxeity, to laugh their joy and cry their grief, is to say a bright and skillful yes to the pataphysical as-if, to create a place and world wherein all other places and worlds live and move. This place is eccentric, not egocentric, and it is in the least things, as Kierkegaard says. All experiences of lovers come from the creation of the two-scene, where their hahaxeities laugh together, ha-ha, and love together. Twice I have lived forever in a smile, writes Cummings. Lovers live and laugh with imperfections, hahaxeities and idiosyncrasies, as Kierkegaard notes, not despite them. As love was move, so yes is live. These are all verbs, and they are all almost infinitives, though they are bare infinitives, without to, and so they are not quite infinite, but rather, as Friedman says, the never-changing infinite found in the ever-changing finite. And as Cummings writes, a forever is love's any now, and her each here is an everywhere. To say yes to the as-if, to act in love, is what it means to really live. This life is fragile, now and here, and also nowhere. It is a life that embraces exceptions and ha-has, as to live is a clinomen of to love, I to O. Cummings writes that love is all of wishing, and this is how I read the second last line. Skillfully curled doesn't mean that something curled all worlds with skill, nor that these worlds curled themselves skillfully, but rather that the worlds are full of skill, all of skill. Yes is full of skill, of worlds, and of wishes. They are curled inside yes, inside those parentheses, like cotyledons inside a seed, waiting to dehiss when yes replies to the as-if. The asymmetry of the poem shows us that through is in the same place as in, after the ampersand, as love is both a movement and a place. As Nancy says, love crosses through the limit, even as it exists in the limit. It is possible in possibility. Love is more than love, writes Cummings. Love is a place, and yes, and a world, wherein everything lives, moves, and is. With the little clinomen swerves from love to move, and yes to live, from me to you, from love and laughs to living, Cummings creates a pataphor, or a pataphysical conceit, that plays on the metaphysical conceits of the metaphysical poets, treating them as most real. He makes the jokes, exceptions, and parodies of the modernists most serious by making them worlds of nature and mystery, like the world the Romantics wondered at, but more. Love fabricates the unknown. It is to say yes to the as-if. It does dreams. It is a place, an everywhere which you and I have agreed, Cummings writes. The smallest joy of love is a universe emerging from a wish. Love is idiosyncratically embracing the idiosyncrasies of another, and pataphysically creating worlds from them. A world from which lovers can experience the world, and worlds in which lovers can move and place and laugh and be. They are aha in the cosmos, disorder in order, exceptions in the norm, which creates totality. In this way, I think I've opened Cummings's seeds of love, treating these tender shoots, these as-ifs, as most real, and thereby hopefully and wishfully opening some joyful discussion on love today. Thank you.